Hi everyone, welcome to Birthing at Home, a podcast. I'm Elsie, your host. I've had 2 home births in April 2020 and in June 2023. I'm a mental health nurse and an ex-student midwife that has a strong passion for birth and supporting women. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of the land I'm recording on in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. I would also like to acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been birthing at home on country for tens of thousands of years prior to the British invasion and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. Episode 14 is a special episode in the lead up to Christmas. Today we hear from Sarah in Western Australia who homebirthed her second baby who was due on Christmas Day in 2022. It was an extremely enjoyable conversation from a traumatic first birth, then deciding to go for top private health for the best obstetrician she could find, to then being told she would have to be induced before her Christmas estimated due date, and then taking back her power and learning about homebirth at 16 weeks pregnant and going on to have a beautiful home birth experience. If you're due around Christmas or have ever been due around Christmas, you'll love this. If you want to help spread the word of home birth and support the podcast, please share it or any of the episodes you love. And don't forget there are home birth mama shirts and born at home onesies available on my Etsy. The link is in my description. Enjoy! Welcome, Sarah, to the Birthing at Home, a podcast. Thank you so much for doing this again, because we had I had some technical difficulties the first time, but it's only a couple of days later, so I'm really glad that you've been able to come on. Do you want to give a little rundown about who you are, where you live, who's in your family?
Yep, of course. So I am Sarah. We're in WA. South of the river, because if you live here, you know that.
Okay.
My family is me and my husband. He's FIFO. We've been together for 10 years this year, so high school sweethearts.
Nice.
Yeah, and our 2 daughters. So we've got Amara, who is nearly 2.5, and River, who is 10 months old.
Yeah. What's your partner's name?
He's Mitch.
Mitch. Cool. Nice. I've almost been with my husband for 10 years too. Almost next year. Yeah.
Oh,
cool. So we were just talking about this before. So Amara was born in a hospital 2.5 years ago, and you had a home birth with River. Yeah.
I did, and totally different experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. Before you had Amara, did you know much about birth, anything about birth, about home birth, about pregnancy?
I had been working, I'd done a degree in early childhood and primary teaching, and I'd been working in daycare. So looking back now, it makes me laugh. My thoughts on, pregnancy and birth and little kids, I was like, oh, pregnancy is just, it just happens, and then birth just happens, and then I need to worry about the newborn, but I've worked with babies, so that's fine. It's fine. I'll nail this. This will be easy.
Yeah.
And then, during Amara's pregnancy, I did a bit of research, but it was very, very surface level and very much about, this is what's happening at this many weeks pregnant, and very little about birth or breastfeeding or postpartum or any of that.
Yeah.
Definitely had never even heard of home birth when I was pregnant with Amara.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was 16, 17 weeks pregnant with River that anyone had even brought home birth up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was almost like I accidentally went down that pathway, because I actually started with a private OB.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so totally
dodged the
bullet.
Yeah. Wow. I always find it so interesting, hearing from mums that I guess I have some friends at the moment that are going through their first pregnancies as well, and they're finding it so overwhelming, the amount of stuff that I guess you don't know what you don't know, but also I suspect they're going through the hospital system, so I suspect they're perhaps being asked questions or given information that they're like, whoa, I had no idea what any of this is about, and they're just very quite overwhelmed. like, do you know how you were born? Like, what kind of birth your mum had?
I was actually a very similar birth to my own first birth. So I was my mum's first baby.
Yeah.
And I was actually born in the same hospital. And I did like OB/GP shared care with my first birth. And I had the same obstetrician that delivered me.
Oh my gosh, that's so weird. Weird but cool, I guess.
It was a bit. And I was like, you get you go to the doctor and say I'm pregnant. And they go, private insurance or no? And I said no. So they go, okay, well, this is your list of, public OBs to choose from. Yeah. And none of them really, everyone that I looked at, I was like, like, I guess I've got to pick someone. And then I realised that was the same guy who delivered me as a baby. And I was like, well, maybe it's a sign. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, no, it's quite similar. I was born a little bit different, I guess. I was induced, so this is my mum's birth with me. She was induced and eventual forceps. With my daughter, I was induced. I didn't end up with forceps, but we both had hemorrhages and things like that. So
super fun stuff. And growing up, like, do you remember any conversations about like your birth, like, how you were born, or like, I guess, did you have like a thought like about what birth was like? I guess like it just happens, but did you have any fears around it, do you think, already?
Yeah. Birth had never really been a big point of discussion, but I was quite aware that it was like, I remember Mum saying to me, she felt awful for weeks afterwards, and she thought she was going to pass out after she had me. And, like, while it was the best day of her life was having a baby, not the best day of her life for her.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think I had a lot of fear, actually. I went in quite, like, it'll just be fine. Like, I'm more than capable of doing this. And while I think that can be a really good starting point, I didn't realise that I would need to advocate for myself or go against the grain in any way. So yeah.
Did you do any like birth education type stuff with Amara?
No, because she was tail end of COVID, so the hospital wasn't offering anything, and a lot of we didn't have the money to be able to afford any of the private classes. So it was kind of like, oh well, it'll be fine. That's I'm going to say that a lot, but so we didn't, and I do regret that, because I feel like had we done education, it would have really been worth it. But again,
you don't know what you don't know. You don't like in a public hospital, if you break your arm, you don't expect that you'll have to turn up and know which bone you've broken and that you've BYO your own plaster, and you just expect that this will happen and they'll have the knowledge to fix it. And so you don't know what you don't know. So what was Amara's birth like? Or what, I guess maybe starting before that, like what was the lead up to Amara's birth?
So she, with her, I had like a textbook perfect pregnancy. I was one of those lucky people that didn't have any morning sickness at all. I had a few bouts of gastro, which was quite unfortunate. And I was so unwell. And there were a few people that said to me, it's just morning sickness, just get over it. And I was like, this can't be. This is horrible. I feel like I'm dying. But it was gastro. Short-lived. But no, textbook perfect pregnancy pretty much. Otherwise, I put on a lot of weight with her, and that was something, like I put on 30 kilos. So that was something that was kind of like, but otherwise, everything was just cruisy. I did all of this like standard testing and, and everything like that. It all came back great. And then her birth, my waters broke. So I had pre-rupture of membranes and no labour. So after 12 hours, so we went in for an assessment when they broke, and it wasn't like a big gushy sort of thing, it was a little trickle. Went in for assessment, confirmed it was amniotic fluid, sent us home and kind of said, you'll probably go into labour today, try and, eat some food and have a rest. And so that's what we did. But they'd said if nothing's happening, you need to come back in at about 4 or 5 o'clock that evening. And that was it was either the morning of my due date. I think it was, yeah, morning of my due date.
Yeah.
So yeah, we went in that evening and like short-staffed, and triage. People were coming in active labour, so we kind of just got popped to the room and left.
Yeah.
I think we started antibiotics, and I don't think we did. We might have started the prostaglandin gels, but yeah, basically for the next kind of 24 hours from when I went back in, so 2 days after my labour had after my waters had broken, my labour still hadn't started, so it was just gels and antibiotics.
Yeah.
And we got two. I think she was born on the Monday, so I think it was 3 days later. And they said, "Oh, we have to start your induction sort of thing." So they took me into a birth suite and they did a VE, and they said, "Oh, you're not ready, so you shouldn't really be in the birth suite." But this was an OB that had come in.
Yeah. And
I said, "Oh well, like I'm done. Like I haven't slept. Like, can I please have a C-section?"
Yeah.
And they went, "Oh no." And I was like, I remember looking at my husband and being like, I literally haven't slept since I think it was Friday night I'd slept.
Yeah. And
this was now Monday, and I was like, how am I going to do this? So, yeah, I asked for a C-section, and they said, no, you can't have one because we don't like to do that, and begrudgingly started me on the drip, which was pretty effective. I was kind of having, what's the right word? Like overstimulation, I suppose.
Yeah.
Too many contractions. It was really hard to get a balance, but I also had an epidural, so it was kind of fine.
Yeah.
Eventually, we were 10 centimetres and it was time to push. And, of course, with an epidural, I, was not the most involved person in that birth.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I had quite a long pushing stage, ended up with an episiotomy, a hemorrhage, and a fair bit of birth trauma, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. But, I mean, this is like the classic cascade in action.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
And if you, if you don't know what you don't know. I saw like a comment on somebody's Instagram the other day about like I think they were just asking in a genuine, curious way, but they were saying, why wouldn't you get an epidural? Like it's pain relief, and there's like obviously some steps before that can get you caught up in this cascade, but yeah, one thing leads to another and it increases the risk of this. And then, yeah, like an epidural might sound nice, but do you want an episiotomy as well? Like, do you remember how any of those conversations went? Like, even like, oh, you've got to have an induction, or now we give you antibiotics. Like, do you remember how any of that went?
I definitely do, because for me, the birth trauma wasn't so much about what had actually happened during the birth, and it was all about coercion and consent.
Yeah.
So, nothing was presented to me as an option.
Yeah.
And I didn't know any better, but as much as, I don't know. Nothing was presented as an option. And there was a lot of like, even with I had asked for a C-section and they'd said no, and then they turned around and said, oh, well, when we start your induction, we want your baby delivered within 12 hours. And I didn't know a whole lot about birth then, and I looked at them and I said, well, she's not going to be at 12 hours. I'm a first-time mum, and you've just told me my cervix is unfavourable completely. Yeah. So just because they'd said, oh, if it's 12 hours, we'll give you a C-section. I said, well, I just want my C-section now then. Yeah. In hindsight, that is the one thing that I'm glad that they pushed back on, but then at the same time, I do think I don't think I would have had the birth trauma had they given me what I'd asked for. Yeah. It's actually so ironic. The one time you asked for the C-section and they say no. Yeah. And then they did all this other stuff. Yeah. Oh my gosh. The episiotomy I actually declined several times. Yeah. And, they're standing there with scissors going, you need this. And I'm going, no, because something that I was really sure on was I was more than happy to tear. Yeah. Because, that's what our bodies do.
Yeah.
But I did not want an episiotomy, and I ended up with this episiotomy, and it needed resuturing 2 weeks later.
Oh,
again,
my
and that was
gosh.
quite intense.
Yeah.
And the recovery from that was quite, significant.
Yeah. Yeah. Did that whole experience have a pretty, well, like, did it have a impact on your postpartum experience, or that first exposure to motherhood with Amara?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. So I think there are a few key moments that really stand out for me, and it actually wasn't until I was probably 6 months postpartum with her that I looked back on it and I was like, wow, like, this isn't just normal postpartum. I'm actually really dealing with some stuff here, and that's when I reached out to, get some professional help.
Yeah.
But I remember that literally the moment she was born and they placed her on my chest, and I closed my eyes and I just thought, oh my gosh, I just want a nap, like, just leave me alone, like. And then somebody said to me, it wasn't my husband, I think it was the midwife, she said, look, it's your baby. And I looked down and I was like, oh, it is my baby.
Yeah.
But like, all I wanted was like, leave me alone.
Yeah.
Like, I just want a nap and I just want to go to sleep. And it was quite a heartbreaking moment, because that was my first moment of motherhood and I didn't want it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But going on from there, I was so deeply connected to my daughter, like, and still am. My first daughter, part of me.
Yeah.
Really had such a deep connection with her. But yeah, my early motherhood was, so the professional help that I've seen has all been birth trauma related, and I didn't see any other mental health professionals because I thought what I was dealing with was fine.
Yeah.
But I suspect I had quite a bit of postpartum anxiety going on.
Yeah, okay.
I was doing some strange things.
Okay.
I was obsessed with recording down to the minute, sleep length and how many nappies each day. And
yeah.
We were mixed feeding from the start, so that was a bit obsessive over exactly how many meals she was getting.
Yeah.
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 So, yeah, and just, I think when you leave a birth experience feeling disempowered, and it's, or at least for me, it set me up to feel disempowered in motherhood, and I didn't trust myself.
Yeah.
And it really took me a long time to feel like a mum. I just felt like I was somebody that had, this baby had rocked up and was now part of my family, and I had to look after this baby.
Yeah.
And I loved her and I was really connected to her, but as a mum, I didn't identify with that title. And, I could see other mums and they were mums, but for me it was like, I don't feel like I fit in that box. And I think it was like a resistance.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's quite a challenging time.
Yeah. And so when you found out you're pregnant with River, and so you were already booked in, did you say, to have obstetrician care with River, is that correct?
So probably a month after Amara was born, I said to my husband, right, we're not doing that again. We're not going public again because it was awful. We're going to get gold health insurance, and we're having this baby private because
yeah that's I'm really glad that you are sharing your story, because this is definitely a common thing. People think that private is so much better, but anyway, continue. I'm sure you'll reveal why.
And a particular hospital I was booked in at, I've now found out their C-section rate's above 50%. So,
my God, 50%. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, and the OB that I've was booked in with too, I've since heard quite a bit about them, and I just think, something just aligned, and I actually got out of the second experience. Actually, both of my experiences in hindsight, I think I needed them to be the catalysts for where I'm at now. And so, as much as, I wouldn't wish that first experience on anyone, it's actually what I needed to grow into what I, am now, and the mother that I am, and all those sorts of things. So, Amara, we were booked out, got our private health insurance after Amara, and then River was a planned conception. So, but we got pregnant. We thought my husband's FIFO. We thought it would take us ages, and we got pregnant on the first try, which is super lucky. But also, I was only like 7.5 months postpartum.
Yeah.
So kind of thrown into that. And at 16 weeks, we went to go and see our private OB for our first appointment, and my due date was Christmas Day. And the OB took one look at me and said, you know, in a professional doctor way, said, well, you're too fat and your last baby was relatively big, and, you know, if printed me off a nice, you know, chart that showed me that if I got to full term, my baby would be too fat. And I would be too fat and I wouldn't be able to push my baby out of my vagina.
No.
And so I needed this induction for 38 or 39 weeks. And that it would be great.
So I didn't coincide with Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, you know, I went there really confidently with a huge list of questions and asked about 2 out of 10 because I just felt so, like, confronted. But one of my questions that I did ask was, so, you know, I'm due around, you know, the holiday period. What is going to happen? Are you having holidays? What happens if I birth on Christmas Day? What days are you having off? And they would not answer me. They talked around the question and said, this is my backup OB, but that won't happen, blah, blah, blah. And the backup OB was a male, and that was something that I had purposely not wanted.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I left that feeling like, when I walked in here, I thought I was going to say to this OB who, you know, promoted vaginal birth and, you know, physiological birth, I thought I was going to walk in there and be like, I want a drug-free physiological birth, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I walked out of there being like, my body's incapable of this because, you know, I'm fat. And
so was this not that it matters, I'm just like curious, and maybe other listeners will be as well. Was it a female obstetrician that said that?
It was a female.
And so she said literally that you're too fat.
Yeah, and for a little bit of context as well, I'm not a petite person, but I wouldn't identify as plus size. So
still,
my BMI, I've always been quite heavy for my size, but my BMI was one tick off the, you know, cut off of whatever it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was quite horrified by that, and actually the BMI thing is really gets a bee in my bonnet because with my first daughter, I conceived her on our honeymoon, and so I was actually really quite fit, probably the fittest I'd been in years.
Yeah.
And I think by anyone's definition, fit. And in my hospital notes, they said my pre-existing complication was obesity. So that just proved to me what a load of crap it was.
What the heck? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But yeah, so I left that.
Wow, so you got rid of her.
I dropped her, yep. We got
excellent.
in the car because, you know, the initial appointment's quite expensive too, and we paid all this money for health insurance. And I said to my husband, I was like, I don't know, but that didn't feel good. Like, that really didn't feel good. And he's kind of going, well, this is what you wanted. You know, we've paid, I think it's like, you know, $1,500 for private health insurance over the course of a year, and we've paid their fee, and, you know, but we actually did think that having private health insurance would cover pretty much all of a private obstetrician, and we kind of worked out that it was still going to cost us between like $3,000 and $6,000 on top of what we're paying for health insurance. Yeah, she wanted us to have,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, she wanted us to have $300 scans at this special scan place. Yeah, it was just, and then the anaesthetist. That's
so corrupt.
Yeah, it was crazy. I couldn't believe how expensive it was going to be to have a private OB with top hospital, and it was
Oh my goodness.
I left that.
So you got out of the appointment and you're like, this doesn't feel right. But had you kind of, like, did you have any idea what your next step might be, or was it? Yeah.
So I had knew about the family birth centres.
Okay.
And I don't know why I hadn't applied for them when I fell pregnant. Probably because we had health insurance and that was what we were going to do.
Yeah.
The more you pay, the better the right.
Yeah. So, if only.
Yeah. So I called the family birth centres, and I was pretty much like, because I wasn't going to wait for an email or anything. I wanted to get this sorted. And being 16 weeks pregnant, I was pretty confident that they were going to be full. So I called them and said, look, this is the deal. And they said, look, you've had a hemorrhage previously. Your BMI, unless you gain no weight during your pregnancy, you will tip over our cutoff. So yeah, it was a hemorrhage, a BMI, and they were full as well anyway. So they said, no, I'm so sorry, you can't birth here. But the woman that I spoke to was lovely, and she said to me, "Oh, have you tried talking to any private midwives?" And I was like, "Oh, no." And she said, "Oh, well, have a Google and you might find a private midwife." And at this point, I had no idea what a private midwife did.
Yeah,
I had no idea how that was any different to anybody else. But I found this list of private midwives and I started ringing them. And pretty much everyone was busy, didn't service my suburb, or had booked holidays.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so ended up finding this lovely, lovely midwife who really listened to my story and why, and given as well, from her point of view, I've phoned her up. I don't even know what her job is. I've just been told to phone her.
Yeah.
And so I'm just,
I just want
word
you.
vomiting at her. And she said to me,
Yeah.
"Oh, it sounds like you really need someone, to do this with you. But I was going to go away with my family this Christmas, and I said, "Oh, that's okay. Don't worry about it. That's fine." And she said, "Let me talk to them and I'll get back to you within the next couple of days." And I went, "Oh, okay." And we'd agreed that in the meantime, I would, Google search everything and try and find another option. And so that's what I did. And I found a few, I think it might have been MGP programs, but I don't think I would have been eligible for them anyway. And a couple of days later, she got back to me and she said, "Yes, look, I can take you on. If you want me, I can take you on. I'm happy to do that." And I was like, "Oh, great." And she says right at the end of the conversation, she goes, "Oh, most of my clients just have their babies at home. Do you want to do that?" And I said to her, "Oh, maybe." And I hung up the phone and I turned to my husband and I was like, "She wants me to have my baby at home. What?" This was nuts, right? Because nobody that I'd ever come across had a home birth. And
so this is the very first time you were ever hearing about home birth.
And I was like,
"Oh my gosh.
This is crazy. Like, who does this for one?" And I had all the questions that everyone who doesn't know about it has. Like, is this safe? What happens?
Yeah.
So, yeah, huge learning curve because I clicked with her and she basically said to me, "Look, your OB was awful and that's not true, and you can have a baby and you can push a baby out of your vagina." And, she just reassured me that my body was capable. So it didn't matter where I was going to birth, she was going to be there, and that was...
As long as she was there.
Yeah, as long as she was there. And having her throughout my pregnancy and obviously for the birth as well, but I was just able to 100% trust her. And my previous experience, my birth trauma was caused by these care providers. And so to have that full turnaround and be this huge mistrust in our medical system to being this is actually somebody that I 100% trust you. I know you're going to keep me safe. I know you've got my best interests at heart. So yeah, she was incredible.
Well, how different, the obstetrician, but it could easily have been anyone else, I guess, in that system, particularly, saying, "No, you won't be having your baby on Christmas Day if I can do anything about it." And then she rearranged her private family, commitments to be there to support you. That is so incredible.
Yeah, I was pretty lucky.
So I guess it was, your 16 weeks, you find a private midwife. This is the very first time you're learning about home birth. Was it kind of education by fire, or what was the process?
So I think at about 17 weeks with her, she came and had a visit with me just to chat, and she was like, my husband wasn't home for this, he was at work, but it was kind of if you're going to do this, we do need to book you in now. And so, we just had a chat about kind of how it would work having a private midwife. So our visits will be, 1 to 2 hours and I'll do them all in your home. And it was all kind of the basic stuff that I needed to know, this is where you do your scans if you want scans, which was, I was like, what? If I want scans, what do you mean? I have to do these things, right? She's like, no, you don't have to do anything. And I was like, what? What is this? And so then not only did I have to learn about home birth, I also had to learn about everything else as well, because until then it was just a mandatory thing that I had to do.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden I've got all of these options, and so it was trial by fire.
Yeah.
But she said to me at that initial visit, she said, make sure you just go and join the Homebirth Australia groups and all of, the Perth Homebirth groups.
Yeah.
And they were just an incredible place of, like, knowledge and wisdom and support. And I don't actually think I ever posted in there during my pregnancy, but I read everything.
Yeah,
because you just
amazing.
get such an awesome range of perspectives and views and experiences. And, so that was...
Yeah.
one of my biggest resources. And then, of course, the podcasts. So
in those home birth groups, though, and I'm a part of the wild pregnancy and free birth group as well, and sometimes they ask questions and I was like, wow, I never thought I thought that I knew a lot about home birth and birth, but I've never heard that question before. And to just you seriously do learn so much from people sharing their stories, other people asking questions. And it's great to get, and like you say with the questions, it's people asking things that you're like, and it opens up this whole window of I've never even for me that was like the placenta. I was like, my first birth, they were like, do you want to see a placenta? Sorry, it's placenta. And I was like, no, ew, gross. And then my second one, I was like, I want to do all these things with it, and now I would even do things differently again if I was to have another baby, because it's this journey of learning and so learning all the stuff. Did you do any particular programs or anything like that with your midwife?
No, even though I knew from my first birth, we should have done prenatal education, she gave me so much about birth, so much knowledge and education about birth and all this sort of stuff. I actually felt like I had a really good understanding. And then in regards to the birth education, I'd kind of only ever heard of hypnobirthing, and I was quite interested in that, and I kind of said to her, do you recommend anywhere? And she kind of went, you could do it, but and there was something about that, just asking that question and the way that she answered it, I was like, do I actually need to do this? And for some people it's amazing, but it kind of let me click into this sense of no, I don't, because I can do this. And as much as I trusted my midwife 100% during that pregnancy, I also learned to trust myself 100%, and I went into that birth without a single fear. And I think 7.5 months prior to that, I didn't even know what my birth was. I wanted a private OB in a private hospital. I had birth trauma. And I went into this next birth being like, it is just going to be what it's supposed to be, and it's gonna be fun. I can do this. I know I can do this. And it was, we didn't do any formal classes or anything like that, but she did do one of her visits was birth education. Is there any particular resource or anything that really made something click really well, or just, I don't know, reinforced that trust in your body? Or was it, I guess, the continuity with the midwife that helped all of that? The continuity had the biggest impact of being so sure and going in feeling so certain that it was all going to be good.
What about Mitch? Because Mitch is also, at work, and you're out here plotting this home birth. What was his take on it?
He basically said, this sounds a bit nuts, but if it's what you want to do, let's do it.
That's amazing.
And so he came to as many of the appointments as, I feel weird calling them appointments because they're really not. They're visits, catch-up. He was at as many of those as possible. And he was kind of I think a bit confronted by some of the realities of birth. It's loud, it's bloody, it's, because in a hospital, a lot of that is packed away or tidied up really quick, or you have an epidural and you don't see a lot of that. But, our midwife showed us a few of the birthing videos from her clients, and so we had a pretty, and there were, some of them, there was poo everywhere, or there was blood everywhere, or it was really loud, and so we watched those together, and I think that was a really good inclusion of her birth education stuff, was actually showing us and seeing clients that she had personally, like she was in the videos too.
Yeah, wow.
Was really kind of like reassuring.
Yeah.
But yeah, Mitch now says that everyone should have a home birth.
And I guess also touching on like friends or family that you might have mentioned it to, did you receive any pushback or anything like that?
I think everyone was generally pretty like, oh, that's a weird choice. Are you sure about that? Are you really sure about that? Do you really want to do that? Like, what are you going to do if?
Yeah.
You know, that was a constant question. Like, what happens if, you know, worst case scenario? And you're like, thanks for thinking about that.
Yeah.
I think the funniest one was, so due Christmas Day, it was a you know, a couple of weeks before Christmas, and one of my aunties said to me, oh, where are you having your baby? And I went, oh, at home. And she went, oh!
She thought it was a
you're
joke.
So funny. And I was like, yeah. And she was like, where are you really having your baby? At home. Oh! And I was like, no, like, I'm having a home birth. And that was, you know, kind of like my first person who was really like, why are you doing this? This is so unsafe. You're not being responsible. Like, you're making a bad decision. But honestly, by that point, I was so far into it that I was like, yeah, you know, that's,
whatever.
That's your beliefs, and I'm actually don't have the time or the energy right now to try and change that. So whatever.
Yeah, amazing. And, you know, now that you realised or learnt that you actually had all of this power to, you know, pick and choose what you do and don't do, is there anything in particular that you declined during your pregnancy?
I declined the GTT.
Yeah.
And I think because of my BMI, and I didn't have gestational diabetes in my first, and I was screened for the GTT. I think that was the only thing that my midwife came across as that she did really want me to do.
Yeah.
But again, it was always my choice. So I decided that I would do the finger prick testing.
Yeah.
And we did that for like 2 weeks, and a couple of my levels were, if I was in the hospital, you know, mainstream system, I would have been diagnosed with having gestational diabetes.
Yeah.
But it was like every now and then 1 point over. And I was like, you know what? I don't have the headspace to go on these crazy diets. Well, they're not crazy diets, but they, you know, there's it's a lot to learn, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, I am just actually going to trust my body that this is fine. And everything that I kind of researched had made me feel like the parameters were really too low, to, you know.
But like, also super inconsistent.
Yes.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So I just kind of went, you know what? I'm not going to worry about it.
Yeah.
It's going to be fine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I declined that, and I declined any growth scans. I ended up having an extra ultrasound at about, I think I would have been 37, maybe even 38 weeks, because I'd had a bleed. And I did say to the sonographer, I said, I don't want you to do any growth scans. And I think they respected that.
Yeah.
But even if they had have come back saying, oh, your baby's crazy big or crazy small, I think my midwife would have just been like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And I declined the Group B strep.
Yeah.
Because that all felt a little bit wishy-washy.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I'm sure there's a few other things. I did most of the stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, if I had another pregnancy, I think I would trust myself more again.
Yeah.
And do less of the stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, and so you had prolonged rupture of membranes with Amara. How did it all kick off for River? Especially like, yeah, being due on Christmas Day. Like, it's not like December. Even now in November when we're recording this, it's like, you know, people have already got their decorations up, Black Friday. Like, it's just, you know, make sure you get your leave in. It, like, the build-up for the stress in general is big, let alone having a baby.
And everywhere you go, there's a countdown.
Yeah, yeah.
That was huge. You'd walk into the shopping centre or listen to the radio. 6 more days till Christmas. And
so true.
Everyone expects me to go.
Oh my gosh, it's so true.
Inescapable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had it in my head that I would go early.
Okay.
And at the same time, I also was telling myself, you have to be prepared to be pregnant for 42 weeks, maybe a bit longer. You know? But I had this gut feeling that I would go early. I didn't.
Yeah.
I went over. And it was kind of like, you know, the day before Christmas Eve and then Christmas Eve, I was really like, oh, like, this sucks. Like, I'm done with being pregnant. I don't want to be pregnant anymore. Really disappointed waking up every morning and being like, I'm not in labour. Like, those days before Christmas were quite challenging.
Yeah.
The Christmas Day was good because it was Christmas Day and, you know,
yeah.
too busy worrying about Christmas.
Distraction.
And, you know.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, kind of Boxing Day was still on the high of Christmas, and then it kind of got to the next day, and I was like, you know what? Like, my baby didn't come before Christmas, so whatever.
Yeah.
Like, they're not going to be in there forever. So it was like this huge, like, like pressure on myself before Christmas, and then after Christmas I was like, this is fine. If we get to, you know, halfway through January, we need to chat.
Yeah.
At that, once my due date had come and gone, I was actually able to settle into it and be like, okay. And appreciate all the good things that come with going over as well, and not just good things for the baby and good things, you know, like I get an extra day with my daughter, just me and her.
Oh, that's so special.
And I get to, you know, like I get to sleep in because she was sleeping.
Yeah.
And I get to do these things, and I can pop to the shops, and like, so I really embraced that.
Yeah.
In those few days, but I was still quietly impatient because I did have 2 stretch and sweeps.
Yeah.
And I requested those. That wasn't something that was, you know, put on to me.
Yeah.
But after the second stretch and sweep, I had a little bit of cramping. So this is now the 28th.
Okay.
So it was only a couple of days that I got to have this nice.
Yeah. It sounds really lovely though.
It was quite nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'd booked in the stretch and sweep for her to come over, and we'd organised that my daughter would go and stay with my parents that night, and that we did the stretch and sweep at I think about 7:30 in the evening, so that if I did have any discomfort, I could have a hot shower and go to bed.
Yeah.
So yeah, we did that, and I did have some really mild period cramping that night, and a little, you know, bit of mucus and a little bit of blood, and kind of like it was the same thing that had happened with the first stretch and sweep, which was prior to Christmas too. So I was like, this is just annoying. Like, I've got backache. I'm gonna have a shower and go to bed because this sucks.
Yeah.
But yeah, thankfully it wasn't. It was the start of labour for me.
Yay.
So I fell asleep. We got into bed, and yeah, woke up at maybe 1 o'clock in the morning. To more, because they'd fizzled out as well. By the time I actually went to sleep, they fizzled out. Mitch is probably going to hate me for sharing this because he's quite a private person, but I said to him, I was like, you've got to have sex with me. We've got to have sex. Because it might work.
Yeah.
Oh, I was like, no, you have to.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, we had sex, went to bed, woke up at about 1 o'clock in the morning to a few more cramps, and it was kind of like they were definitely more intense, and I had this kind of gut feeling that, like, oh, maybe this is the start of labour, but I didn't want to be disappointed.
Yeah.
And so I tried to sleep, and it was kind of like they were coming maybe every 20 minutes, half an hour, so I was able to nod off in between, but when they came, I was really quite uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke him up and we got up because I kind of, you know, you need to come and bounce on my bouncy ball in the living room with me. And he's like, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, no, I don't think so. I just want company.
I'm lonely.
I'm lonely. I just want a buddy.
Oh my gosh.
So he begrudgingly got out of bed and came to the bedroom with me. And he, like, I'll never forget, he kind of like, he's such a heavy sleeper, and he's the sort of person he can fall asleep really, really quickly. And so he's sitting there on the couch, like, falling into asleep in the conversation. So it was making me quite angry.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's important.
Yeah.
But yeah, so at 3 o'clock in the morning, I can't even remember exactly what we did for the first few hours, but we're watching telly, we're chatting. Oh, I felt like it was the time where I had to tell him exactly, like make a plan.
Yeah.
Because we hadn't really done, we'd done a bit of a birth plan, but I was also like, it'll be what it be.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was like, this is what happens if we need to pick our daughter up, and this is what's going to happen if this happens. And, like,
yeah.
And he's like, yeah, mm-hmm. I'm like,
yeah. Oh, that's great.
But, yeah, so I talked his ear off until about 6 o'clock in the morning. And then,
Is he on the ball as well, or is it just you on the ball?
oh, he was on the couch.
Okay.
I was the only one on the ball. But I was also really, like, excited.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a chatterbox at the best of times. Chuck some, adrenaline and smoke in me, and I was like...
Yeah.
So, he made some breakfast, and then we started playing board games, and by the time we had breakfast, I was like, it's fizzled out, like, this isn't the day, like, I was quite disappointed. He was like, oh, what do you want to do? Do you want to pick our daughter up and we can go, and do something fun? And I was like, oh, no, I just, like, this just sucks, like, I just want to be sad.
Yeah.
I just want to go and sit in bed and have a sook and, like, ugh.
Yeah.
And so we had brekkie, and kind of that's what I planned to do. And after we'd finished eating, my contractions almost like immediately ramped back up, and I was like, oh, no, that was one that hurt.
Yeah.
But it had changed. So they'd gone from being quite like mild and relatively regular to now they were coming like all over the place. And it was like I'd have a really intense long one and then nothing for 20 minutes. And then I'd have like 3 really quick.
Yeah.
But they'd only be mild, and so it was all over the place. And I was like, okay, well, I must be in labour because this isn't just cramping anymore. But I also don't think I'm in labour. Like, it was this real, I don't know, disbelief.
Yeah.
And then at about 9 o'clock, my sister had phoned, and she had no idea what was going on. And she said, oh, I'm just like round the corner. Do you want me to drop coffee off? And I was like, yeah. And so she came in, and at this point, I've got a photo of it, so I can remember what I was wearing. I was wearing Mitch's underwear, a fancy dressing gown, and a nursing bra. And I answered the door like that. I might have even had the TENS machine on. Yeah, I did. I had my TENS machine.
Yeah.
And so she answers the door, and she goes, are you in labour? And I went, maybe. Come in. And in my pregnancy, I had kind of said to her, like, oh, if you want to be at the birth, like, that would be cool, but I actually don't want to decide that until the day.
Yeah.
And my gut feeling was actually that I didn't really want her at the birth, but I wanted her to see a home birth.
Yeah.
I wanted that for her. Because I feel like I had to go through this whole process to get here, and I was like, maybe I can just give that to you. Maybe you can just watch me do this, and then that'll be better for you.
Yeah.
But I actually think it would have negatively impacted because I just having more people there.
Yeah.
Anyway, she came for coffee. We're having a chat and having a laugh, and I'm having, pretty decent contractions, and I'm kind of going, oh, this one hurts. Oh, ow, ow, ow. Like, still laughing through it, talking through it, making a bit of a joke.
Yeah.
She's going, I think you're in labour. I'm like, no.
This is normal. This is how I always am.
Yeah, So she ended up kicking herself out because she was like, this is getting a bit weird. I don't want to.
She's in denial.
And groaning. And, I remember her saying to me, she's like, you're making sex with me. I was like, right. Yeah.
Oh, my God.
So, yeah, she left at maybe, I don't know, 9:30ish, and then, yeah, still in denial. I was like to Mitch, oh, I might go and have that shower. And so he was still finishing cleaning up breakfast and, all of that sort of stuff. So I went and started to get the shower running, and I wanted his help because my mum had given me this, like, old person shower chair, which was great.
Yeah.
But it was way too high, and so he had to come in and start clicking it down for me. And while he's doing this, because my plan was I was just going to go and have an hour or so to myself.
Yeah.
And he's looking at me and he's going, you're, like, are you all right? And I'm like, oh, starting to get vocal and, like, no longer joking or laughing at all during them. I'm like, things are getting, I'm in labour.
Yeah. There's no going back now.
Like, yep, I'm fine. So I get into the shower, and I felt like I was in the shower for 10 minutes. I wasn't. I was in there for well over an hour.
Yeah, wow.
And between getting into the shower and getting out of the shower, because he came in and interrupted me a couple of times, and he was like, hey, we need to call the midwife. And I was like, no, what time is it? And he was like, oh, it's 11. And I was like, no, she's got a prenatal appointment until 11:30. Don't bother her, leave her alone. And he's looking at me and he's like, no, we need to call the midwife. But yeah, by the time I got out of the shower, I looked at him and I was like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
you can call her. And he did, and she was kind of like, oh, can you, because I'd listen to all the stories and, you know, all the podcasts, and people are like, oh, if, you know, it's when you want to talk to the lady and she's like, oh, and she won't talk to you on the phone.
Yeah.
And, that's pretty much what happened. She was like, oh, can I talk to Sarah? And she's like, no.
Yeah.
She's giving me it. She's shaking
that
her
is
head.
seriously like a tactic. Yeah. That's a tactic they use. Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
I remember when I had Frankie 5 months ago, I remember my husband gave me the phone and I could talk, and I remember thinking in my brain, I was like, oh, I'm not like as far as I thought I was if I can still have this conversation. Yeah. Okay, so the midwife knows.
Yeah. And she's
everything's happening.
I'll pop in and I'll just check how you're going, and, you know, if you're managing fine, I'll give you some more time, and I'll pop back in later. And that's what I was expecting to happen. I was like, yeah. She's just going to pop in. She's going to listen to baby. She's going to reassure Mitch that everything is fine. She doesn't need to be here because I'm not in labour. Like, really torn about whether I was actually in labour or not. And so she turned up and she kind of took one look at me and she goes, I'm going to call the backup, or the second. I'm going to call the second. And I was like, oh. Yeah. Okay, like, whatever. That seems a bit early, but go ahead. And then the second was she was absolutely incredible too. She was probably maybe 40 minutes away, and as soon as she turned up, it was, fill the pool up now. And I was like, I had that moment where I was like, am I actually about to have a baby? Because I know that they don't want me to get in the pool until I'm going to have a baby, but they want to fill it up now, and it's going to take a bit. And I'm kind of doing this like backwards in my head, like, how close do they think I am to having this baby? And I look back at the photos, and when my second midwife had arrived, my butt crack was dark purple all the way up, and I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
They thought I was going to have my baby pretty soon, because by this point I was out of the shower. I was kneeling on the bed with my chest on a bouncy ball. What are they called? Birth ball? Yeah. Gripping onto Mitch, and like something that I look back on from my labour, I'm like, oh, that was so awesome, was the like dynamic and the relationship that Mitch and I had. All I wanted was for him to be like right up in my face. Like, I just wanted to be able to smell him and feel him and like hear his breathing. And we've got some beautiful photos of like me just like holding him like really close.
Wow. Yeah.
And so when they got there, I was rocking and, you know, really deep noises through my contractions, and not being able to have conversations. So I thought I was close. I think they thought I was close, but then it was actually quite a long while. So we continued like that until the birth pool was ready. Got into the birth pool, and I was kind of having like a dull urge to push, is what I describe it as. I wanted to push, but my body wasn't pushing. So I was kind of like, okay, I'm just, and nobody was giving me any sort of, and I think this is a great thing, nobody was being like, do you want to push? Like, nobody was asking, everyone was just letting me do my own thing. But I was quite like, do I try and push because that's what feels like it's going to make me more comfortable, or do I wait for this fetal ejection reflex that I've been hearing about, and do I just wait for my body to do it involuntary? Because my first, it was an epidural with coach pushing, because I was like, I wanted to not push if I could. I wanted my body to do it and then join in, you know. So it was kind of like this half-hearted pushing, labouring, intense labour for quite a long while, a couple of hours. And, you know, I was getting up and going to use the toilet and coming back, and anything in like a deep squat or that sort of position was actually it was really, really intense, almost to the point where it was like no longer feeling good, like no longer feeling like labour, feeling like pain. And so I started to get a little bit, and like, I don't know if this was transition or if it was, you know, something else going on, but I was getting a little bit like, this is a lot, and getting a little, you know, my voice was getting high, and I was getting, you know, a little bit teary, and my midwife kind of said to me, she was like, do you want me to do a vaginal exam and just see what's going on? And I was like, yes. I absolutely want you to do that. And so she had a look and she goes, oh, well, that's your problem. You've got babies trying to come out forehead first. That's silly, isn't it? Oh, do you want me to try and do something and we can try and move baby's head into a better spot? And I was like, yes, please, whatever it is, I want to do it. And so where we were, because it was middle of the day, labouring in the middle of the day, and our neighbours behind us are really built up. And so I was laying on where the dining table is on the floor, and I could actually look out the window and see my neighbours' windows. And so I was watching, I was like, imagine if they're watching this right now. What a story.
Oh my gosh.
And so she did something, and I, was pushing to, and we got River positioned in a better, in a better way. So
yeah.
And literally as soon as that happened, I was like, oh, that's better. Like, this feels fine. And that's, I went from being like, oh my gosh, I don't actually know if I can do this. I remember walking past Mitch and being like, oh, I could do with an epidural, but I don't want one, but I could do with one.
Yeah.
So yeah, once she was repositioned, we got back in the pool, and then started pushing, and she was born maybe about 40 minutes after that, and it was great because I feel like the first experience, it was like everybody else did stuff to me and a baby came out of me. Whereas this was like I did things to my own body that I wanted to do. I felt her and I could feel her, I was continuously checking and seeing how far she was coming, and it was like being able to touch her head, inside of my vagina, and as I pushed, feel her come out a little bit more, and then go back up a little bit and then come out, like that was such a motivator. And also really empowering because it's like, we are allowed to touch our own bodies.
It's your vagina.
It's my vagina.
Put your own finger.
Yeah, exactly.
It's your baby. Like, you can do all of these things.
Yeah, so, we also had a mirror, so I was able to watch her crowning.
Wow.
The actual crowning was a bit of a challenge for me, and I watched my video back the other day when we were preparing to do this. And my midwife, she's like wiping it's such a beautiful moment of the video. She's wiping my face down and she looks at me and she goes, you've just got to trust yourself. And I look at her and she's like, you've trusted yourself for 9 months. You've just got to trust yourself now. You can do this. And I was like, oh, watching that back, I was just like, that just gives me all of the feelings.
So much emotion.
And then same sort of thing as she was crowning, she said to me, she goes, you just have to get through this part. You just got to do this part. It's going to happen. You've just got to do it. You're nearly there. Your baby's nearly here. And she crowned and she was born, and I brought into the water and I pulled her up, and she, had the cord. We unwrapped that, pulled her up. And she was overdue by a few days, but she was absolutely covered in vernix.
Wow.
And she was exactly the same size as my last baby too, in weight, in head circumference, and in length. And so my baby was not too big for me to push out of my vagina.
You should have sent that obstetrician a photo with all the details and be like, stuff you.
I thought about it.
Oh my gosh. I wanted to ask, do you remember the positions to get her in a better position? Was that spinning babies kind of stuff, or do you remember?
It was an internal manual sort of maneuver. She used her fingers to reposition to kind of push her head back to where it should be going. Which I've met one other person who said, oh, my midwife did the same sort of thing, and it was absolutely awful, and hospital setting for that story. For me, it was it was great. It was it wasn't a comfortable experience, but in the whole scale of things, and from the pain of the contractions that I was having before we did that, it was great. So and it was super quick as well. So
and I guess the whole whether that's V's or stretch and sweeps, or the point of all of it is you chose it. You had the power. You had informed yourself on all of these things, and that's the decision that you made. And if that's the decision you make, then like nobody can argue with you. That's your decision. That's right. You know. Wow. And so she was born 4 days after Christmas on the 29th, right?
Yeah, on the 29th, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And so I know we didn't touch too much on it with Amara's birth, but how much blood loss did you have with Amara?
So I had a recorded 1,000 millimeter.
Yeah. And with River, like, was there any concerns?
No, so my midwife said to me, I bled a bit, but not a hemorrhage.
Yeah.
And my second midwife, I remember hearing her quietly go, oh, there's a little bit of blood. Do we, you're like, she wasn't talking to me, she was talking to my main midwife. Like, yeah, there's a bit of blood. Do we want to do anything about that? And my midwife turned to me, she goes, how are you feeling? And I went, great, I'm feeling so good. I'm feeling really, and she's like, yeah, you're feeling okay. I'm like, I'm feeling amazing. She was like, she's fine.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Because with my first, I felt like shit. I felt like I was going to die. I felt terrible. And like, I felt great. And so I knew that, I was fine. But yeah, I wasn't actually expecting, because when you mix blood with water, it looks like it looks like a lot, right? And so I was actually, I wasn't expecting that, and so that was quite confronting for Mitch. And when I look back at the photos, I was like, that actually seems like it, But yeah, it was. I felt great.
Yeah. And how long did you get to stay or choose to stay attached to baby attached to the placenta for?
So my placenta came out probably about 20 minutes after birth, and then I would say about maybe another 10 minutes after that, I was like, the water had gotten cold, I was ready to get out, so I said, yep.
Yeah.
Nice and white and floppy, so we cut a cord. Yeah, and it was actually, my midwife had made me a cord tie, which was really special.
Oh, that's so special.
Yeah, so...
Like a little crochet one.
Crocheted one. I put it, actually, that was the one time I did post in the Homebirth group. I was like, because it was like 3 days before my due date, right before Christmas. And I really have decided I want one of these. I don't want to use this horrible clip. In hindsight, we actually ended up having to use a clip because we didn't get the cord tie tight enough and it was a bit leaky, but we took the clip off after a couple of days and we had our cord tie. But
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And did you get to... experiment with your placenta, relive the things that you did get to have.
So we chucked it in our most used oven dish and whacked it in the fridge. All my good lasagnas in.
Excellent.
It was quite a big one. Lasagna dish. But we had family come over the following day. So we invited my parents, my mother-in-law, my sister, and obviously my daughter came with them to meet River the next evening for pizza, because we'd done that with our last birth too. And we really wanted to see Amara, but we didn't want her to stay with us overnight. We wanted her to go back so that we could sleep a little bit. So they all came over the next night and met her, and I made everybody look at my placenta. At first everyone was like, oh, like, yuck. And then by the time I was like, look, this is one layer of the sac, and this is the other one, and this is the maternal side, and this, and this is the, the veins and the arteries, and blah, blah, blah. They were like, wow, that's really cool. And I was like, yeah.
But also, this is how we're all here. Like, if it wasn't for, we were all in this before. Like, we all had our own placenta, like, because growing up you just think, oh, your belly button, you're like, oh, like, I guess there's a cord, but like, that's amazing. What I want to say, like, what a gift you gave them, because when else do you see a placenta that I don't, like, they're not parading it around the hospital, I presume.
Well, actually, with my first birth, they said, oh, have you got plans for your placenta? We've said, no, yucky, we don't, gross, get it away from us.
Burn it.
And so that's what they did. They whisked it off. We never saw it. But Mitch went in to make himself a coffee, and he accidentally walked into what he calls the placenta room.
The placenta room.
It was just a room full of blood and stuff. Yuck.
It's disgusting. Oh, gosh. I won't make that mistake again. Oh, but that's very, very cool. And like, you know, having had this experience with River, and, you know, obviously having put in quite a bit of work to overcome the trauma with the birth of Amara and whatnot, like, how would you explain the impact of River's birth on, I guess, yourself, your body, like that experience with Amara's birth? Like, how would you explain it, I guess?
It has been her, you know, the pregnancy, the birth, and the postpartum period, and she's 10 months old now, so, you know, has been one of the most kind of impactful and transformative experiences of my life. I think when I look at what my values were, the way that I kind of not thought about myself in a sense of like, you know, body image issues or things like that, but thought about myself in the way of like, I being capable and being powerful and being knowledgeable and having a place in the world and a purpose and all of these sort of things, you know, like I left Amara's birth not trusting my body, not liking my body, feeling like something that I was designed to do I didn't do and I couldn't do, and that, you know, my early postpartum with Amara was, you know, breastfeeding was awful. Like it was actually an interesting one because it was mostly awful, but then it was also amazing and beautiful, but then it was awful. It was like this, it only lasted 3 months. But yeah, it was just, I had kind of this really, really hard time, and then I had this amazing pregnancy, super empowering and like reconnected me back to my body. Amazing birth that I came out of feeling like, holy shit, I can do literally anything. Like, I can. You asked me to, I could do it. You know.
Yeah.
And then my postpartum with her, breastfeeding was an absolute breeze, and we're still going. And it's been great. My recovery was insanely different, and even things like my blood loss postpartum was like minimal, especially in comparison, like, you know, my low-key bleeding and all of that. Just everything was, it felt right. It felt how it's supposed to feel. Nothing felt pain or like discomfort. Like everything just felt manageable and like it was doing a job that it needed to do, which was good.
I think, like, also you know, you've had 2 girls that will likely, I mean, they might not want to, but likely will have children of their own someday. And I think, like, you've also, with having this experience, like, you wanted to give it to your sister and, like, you know, share the story with whoever, but like the generational impact that you've had, I think, I mean, time will tell, but I think that's really powerful as well.
I think even, you know, if my kids choose to not have children or to birth in private hospitals with private OBs, I think this experience has really changed the way that I parent, because I've seen what growing up being told to, you know, be a good girl and to, you know, say, you know, give your autonomy over to somebody and just to go with the flow, to make people happy and, you know, don't cause problems. I've seen what that's done to me in my first birth. And I don't want that for them. I want them to, you know, be powerful and be strong and say no and, you know, really be able to hold boundaries and be confident and make, and then, you know, you can take that into all areas. You can take that into when they start school, and you can take that into when they get a boyfriend, and like, so this experience has actually really, really impacted the way that I'm going to parent my girls. And so therefore, whether or not, whatever birthing options they choose to have or not to have, it will have impacted them, because the way I'm parenting them is different. Kind of linking back to what I said right at the start about Amara's birth sucked. but I needed it
Yeah.
because it was the catalyst for all of this. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, like especially around Christmas time, and like that's, yeah. I mean, I've heard stories from private obstetricians saying that, you know, I play golf on Saturday, so you won't be having a baby on Saturday because I got to go to golf. Let alone, you know, a public holiday, a day that pretty much all of Australia at least takes work off for most people. What an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for having me.